I walked outside that morning, like I did most mornings, coffee in hand, rubber boots on my feet. It was 6:14 a.m., and I stopped right at the property line, a little groggy from the jet lag. But then, I couldn't believe my eyes. The road that had been freshly laid just 9 days ago was gone. Not damaged. Not flooded. Gone. Vanished as if the earth itself had decided it was done tolerating the intrusion. The gravel and fill material, 40 feet of it, had been swallowed up by the water table that had been building up under the surface. Where the road used to be, I saw standing water, 2 feet deep in places, and chunks of gravel buckling from the mud. Cattails were already pushing through cracks, reclaiming the land. This wasn't just a little bit of flooding, this was nature fighting back. I had expected my paperwork, my complaints, and all my efforts to be the weapon, but the wetland had other plans. For months earlier, I had received a notice in my mailbox from the rigorist HOA. A community notice about a new gravel access road that was approved at their board meeting. Construction was starting in 3 weeks. No mention of any permits. No mention of the federal designation that protected the Cobble Creek buffer zone. No mention of the water table or the Clean Water Act. Diana, my neighbor, who had worked as a state environmental compliance officer for 22 years, read it in my kitchen. Took her less than a minute, then she looked at me and said, "They never filed with the Army Corps." I filed 2 complaints the very night they started breaking ground. I thought that would be it. The HOA would be forced to halt construction, right? I was ready for the battle, until I stepped outside that morning and saw the land had already taken action. The road was completely gone. The place where it had been was now a wetland battlefield, and it looked like the earth had already won. My heart sank, but I didn't back down. I grabbed my phone, started snapping photos, 41 of them, all time-stamped and documented. Every crack in the remaining base material, every inch of the wetland pushing back. I made sure it was all documented, even the cattails breaking through the gravel like a statement from nature itself. I walked over to the collapse, the ground soft beneath my boots, and crouched down to capture the exposed cross-section of the gravel and soil beneath. There it was like a wound that had just healed. The surrounding trees and the creek, untouched, but where the road had been. That's where it was different. It was as though the land had taken back what had been wrongfully placed there. As if the pressure beneath the surface had been too much for the earth to ignore any longer. I stood up and walked back to my porch, still in disbelief, but I knew what had to come next. The manila folder with all my evidence, my complaints, the HOA's non-response, Diana's technical assessment, the photographs, sat right where I'd left it, as though it had been waiting for this moment. I picked it up and began going through the contents, reliving every step of the journey I had taken to get to this point. I had compiled everything meticulously, expecting the Army Corps complaint to be my biggest weapon. I thought the paperwork was the key to stopping them. But it turned out the land was faster than any bureaucracy. I opened the folder, took out the HOA notice from October, and looked at it again. It was as thin as paper, as empty as the promises they had made. The gravel access road, no mention of any permits, no mention of federal oversight. Nothing. Not a word about the protected wetland. I had highlighted 3 key phrases when I first read it. The road dimensions, the timeline, and the phrase "no permits required." I had already sent my formal objection to them. Certified mail, return receipt requested. I had followed the rules. The HOA ignored them. The paper trail was all I had, but now I had to let the land show what words couldn't. The road wasn't just a construction project. It was a violation, and the land was proving it by reclaiming what shouldn't have been disturbed in the first place. That morning, as I stood looking at the collapse, I knew one thing for sure. This wasn't just my fight anymore. This was about what was right. What the law said was right. The land was showing its truth, and I was going to make sure it was seen. But this wasn't over yet. The paperwork would keep going. Diana, my neighbor, had been helping me, keeping everything in check, helping me stay calm and methodical. The land had spoken, but I still had to go through the motions. I had to file complaints, I had to wait, I had to be patient. I wasn't looking for a fight, but I wasn't about to let this slip under the radar either. By the time the Army Corps received my complaint and assigned an inspector, I had made sure to document every single detail. The collapse wasn't just a failure, it was evidence. I had watched the land reclaim its territory, but now the evidence was clear. The road was illegal, and it had been built without the necessary permits. No one had the right to alter the wetlands like that. Then came Agent Reyes. When she arrived, I could tell she knew the seriousness of what had happened. She didn't need much time to see that the violation was real. She took her notes, took her samples, and documented everything carefully. The land had already done its part. She just had to confirm it all. And she did. The notice of violation was issued. A federal violation, a mandatory restoration, and a penalty that would cost the HOA at least $47,000. But I wasn't done yet. The road, once a symbol of greed and disregard for the law, was now a reminder that you can't just bulldoze through life without consequences. The HOA had ignored the rules, but the land didn't. The law didn't, and it was about to cost them. You'd think that would be the end of it, right? But no. The HOA's president, Gerald Coates, sent out an email that afternoon, brushing it all aside. He claimed the road had been built for the community's benefit, but ignored the fact that it had been built illegally. He didn't even mention the violation. He treated it like it didn't exist. But people knew. People had seen the documentation, the proof. Paul, one of my neighbors, had been watching the construction unfold. He sent me a message, asking what had really happened. He wasn't fooled by the HOA's email. And soon more people were getting involved. And then the board meeting came. Gerald stood at the front, trying to control the narrative, but the board wasn't having it. Carol, the HOA's attorney, laid out the facts, and when she did, it was clear. Gerald had acted without a permit. And now the HOA was facing not just a fine, but the kind of legal exposure that could cost them far more than the $47,000 restoration fee. And the clock was ticking. The board voted to move forward with the restoration. Gerald voted with the rest, a man who knew it was all over. He had tried to spin the situation, but the facts were there, and so was the law. The road was a mistake, and now the HOA would pay for it. But it didn't end there. The board met again, and Gerald was removed from his position as president. The final blow for him, but the right move for the community. And as for me, well, I stood by the water that night, watching the heron by the creek, completely unaffected by the politics around it. The land had won. The law had won. The fight wasn't easy, but in the end, justice was done. So, what do you think? Was this an open and shut case of justice? Or is there more to this story? I want to hear your thoughts in the comments below. Let me know what you think about the HOA's actions, the violation, and whether the punishment fits the crime. And don't forget, subscribe for more stories like this, where truth always finds a way to come out. As the dust settled and the wetland began its slow recovery, I found myself reflecting on the whole process. It had taken months, longer than I ever thought it would, but the result felt oddly satisfying. The land had taken back what was rightfully its own, the road had crumbled into nothing, and the HOA, once so sure of themselves, had to face the consequences of their actions. The fine was hefty, but what really struck me was the quiet victory of doing things the right way. It wasn't about the money. It was about standing up for something bigger, something more important than just property lines and community rules. It was about respecting the land, the law, and the truth. Gerald Coates might have thought he could bend the rules, but the land had its own way of ensuring justice. The restoration would take time, but I knew that, eventually, the wetlands would heal, just as the system of checks and balances had. It wasn't about me winning. It was about making sure what happened here wouldn't happen again. The land had fought back, and in the end, the right thing had been done. As I looked out at the creek once more, I couldn't help but feel a sense of peace. This wasn't the end of the fight. It was just the beginning of something else. A lesson learned, not just by me, but by the whole community. The road may be gone, but the message was clear. No one gets to destroy what isn't theirs without consequences. Now the question is, how much power do we really have to change things when it matters most? Do we sit back and accept the decisions made for us, or do we stand up, speak out, and make sure justice prevails? What would you do in a situation like this? Let me know in the comments, and don't forget to share this story if you believe we should all fight for what's right.